Lord of the Mysteries. Chapter 1355. Wrapping up the matter. The nearly frozen silence lasted for nearly 10 seconds before the Abraham family members uniformly cast their gaze at Furs. After sensing the mixed emotions of wariness, guardedness, and fear, Furs took the initiative to take a few steps to the side and warned, "Be careful of the negative effects." Even if the Beyonder characteristics hadn't fused with the surroundings and formed sealed artifacts, they contained certain negative effects. However, most of the time, it would only have effects from direct contact. Of course, the Beyonder characteristics here were all high-sequence Beyonder characteristics. No one could be certain if they would actively expand their area of influence. Seeing that Furs didn't show any obvious greed, Dorian nodded and said, "When you finish digesting the secret sorcerer potion, you can consider advancing to sequence 3 Wanderer. I'll give you the potion formula and prepare the corresponding ingredients for you. Of course, at this level, the higher the sequence, the greater the danger you face. This is an objective situation. It doesn't change because of your personal will and arrangements. When the time comes, you can decide whether you wish to advance or not." He said these words because he cared for his student, and on the other hand, he wanted to assure her that whatever the Abraham family possessed was equivalent to her possessing it. No one would treat her as an outsider and deliberately make things difficult for her on the matter of raising her sequence. This could effectively eliminate the heat brought by greed. And after obtaining so many high-sequence Beyonder characteristics, Velos and the other members of the Abraham family weren't unwilling to part with a Wanderer Beyonder characteristic. They even believed that using it to exchange for peace was absolutely worth it. After all, there was only one demigod here, Furs. Without the time to bring out their Grade 0 sealed artifacts, and because of the ineffectiveness of the seals, the Abraham family members didn't dare take out most of the Grade 1 sealed artifacts. Under such a situation, Furs had the ability to finish all of them off. Faced with her teacher's promise, Furs tersely acknowledged. Was the door to the concealed space opened? She thought that the high-sequence Beyonder characteristics in front of her were all from the Abraham family's treasure vault and had been thrown into the real world due to the recent abnormality. However, she did feel that there were too many of them. No. Dorian slowly shook his head, looking confused. The other Abraham family members remained silent, equally confused. No one would believe that treasure would fall from the skies unless it happened before their eyes. "Should we pray to Mr. Fool?" Furs tried giving a suggestion. Dorian, who had a vague guess, immediately looked at the other Abrahams. He saw the ones who had changed faiths to Mr. Fool nod in agreement. Those who hadn't changed faiths were clearly hesitant and eager to object. After some consideration, Dorian composed himself and said, "Gather the ones with negative area of effect traits while using the correct method. Prevent them from combining with the surroundings. I'll pray to Mr. Fool at the side." "All right." The few members of the Abraham family hesitated for 2 seconds before agreeing. Following that, they seized the opportunity to identify the characteristics and attempt to gather them. After some of the members had obtained a certain amount, Dorian finally retreated to Furz's side and bowed his head to pray to Mr. Fool. Soon, a grayish-white fog and an ancient palace deep in the fog appeared in front of him. A high and solemn voice resounded in his ears. "These are the relics of Mr. Dor. Your bloodline curse has been completely removed." Relics of Mr. Dor. Relics. Dorian ruminated over the word and opened his eyes, casting his gaze at the high-sequence Beyonder characteristics. He looked on silently, his vision gradually blurring. Eastchester County, the Hall family manor. Alfred and the others, who had just figured out the source of the explosion and the enemy attack, saw the doors and windows opening at the same time as they crashed into the walls. During this process, several pieces of glass shattered. There is indeed something abnormal. Alfred raised his hand with a solemn expression. He said to his adjutant, squire, personal guards, and bodyguards, "Retreat back to the main house to prevent any accidents that might happen next. At the same time, send a telegram to the Archbishop of Eastchester Diocese and request for assistance." He felt that the most important thing right now was not to investigate the anomaly, but to protect his father, mother, and sister. He had plenty of time to do the former after daybreak. But if anything happened to the latter, it would be impossible to make up for it. After returning to the manor's main house and arranging for strict patrols, Alfred walked into the living room and said to Earl Hall. There was indeed something abnormal, but the guard couldn't describe what he saw. He only felt extreme fear at that moment. Earl Hall nodded calmly and said, We'll do further investigations after daybreak. Sit down and get some rest. Beside him, Audrey was holding her mother's arm as she quietly listened to her father and two brothers talking. Of course, this was only an image. She had been continuously releasing virtual personas in an attempt to find the reason for the sudden opening of doors and windows from the memories of eyewitnesses. After a few minutes, she ended the investigation, somewhat disappointed. For the time being, she temporarily attributed it to the influence left behind by the Mind Dragon, Airihog, and Mr. Wrath. At that moment, she realized that the golden retriever, Susie, had a strange look in her eyes. She quickly sent out a virtual persona and entered the mind island of the other party's soul to have a private conversation. What did you discover? Audrey asked directly. On Susie's mind island, a voice resounded. I smell a thick scent of blood. At the edge of the manor, it happened sometime before the doors and windows opened. Yes, it happened about 10 seconds after the explosion. After hearing that, Audrey pursed her lips and fell silent for a few seconds. Go take a look. Susie immediately stood up and tiptoed out of the living room. She left the manor's main house from a side door on the first floor. During this process, there would be people looking at her from time to time, but they didn't mind her and didn't attempt to stop her. After all, she was just a dog who had mastered psychological invisibility. After walking the path to the furthest building from the manor's main house, Susie twitched her nose and chose an open window before jumping in. Then, she saw a bloody corpse on the bed. Its skin had shed. And what she saw was equivalent to Audrey seeing it through the virtual persona that she planted in her mind island. In the living room inside the main house of the manor, Audrey, who was holding her mother's arm, lowered her head. Then she lifted her head, and her eyes swept slowly and deeply across her family's faces: Earl Hall, Lady Caitlin, Hibbert, and Alfred. She maintained her silence, becoming increasingly silent. Byam, inside the Cathedral of Waves, Alger, who was wearing a robe embroidered with the storm symbol, walked out from the underground area one step at a time. He nodded at the mandated punishers and priests who were waiting by the sides. The seals were restored to normal in time. You can return the items under your watch. Yes, Your Eminence. The mandated punishers, priests, and bishops heaved a sigh of relief as they struck their left chest with their right fists. Alger didn't say anything else as he responded with the same salute. After returning to his room, he slowly looked around. He took a deep breath and found a seat to sit down. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. Alger silently prayed to Mr. Fool, expressing his thoughts of preparing to leave the Church of Storms. The explanation that the seal was restored to normal in time could only convince relatively low-level members of the church. It was impossible to hide from any cardinal or high-ranking deacon, much less the pontiff and the Lord of Storms. And if he didn't get Mr. Fool's approval and protection, Alger didn't dare leave the Church of Storms so casually. He would definitely suffer the wrath of a god. A few seconds later, he saw the familiar boundless gray fog and heard Mr. Fool's reply. Okay. Go to the Church of the Sea God. Phew. Alger relaxed, stood up, and took off his storm robe. After changing into a linen shirt, brown jacket, and pantaloons, Alger looked at the cardinal robe on the table and fell silent for a while. Then, he reached out and folded the robe neatly. After carefully examining it for a few seconds, Alger retracted his gaze and flew out of the cathedral through the open board window by controlling a strong wind. He first flew to the bell tower and landed on the top. He looked down at the surrounding streets and down at Byam. During this process, Alger stepped on the edge of the roof and slowly circled it. Finally, he closed his eyes. A hurricane suddenly stirred as it swept Alger towards the Church of the Sea God. In the ancient palace above the fog, Klein silently sat on the high back chair belonging to the fool. His figure would occasionally turn incorporeal, as though he was wearing a mysterious and classical black robe. During such instances, he wore a hood that made his face indiscernible. At other times, he would return to normal. However, he was enveloped in a faint gray fog. The frequency of this change gradually slowed down. And every time Klein transformed into the black-robed, hooded figure, slippery tentacles with strange patterns growing would extend out from under his clothes. These nearly transparent tentacles flailed about, striking everywhere as if taking the palace for itself. After a while, Klein's figure finally stabilized. Out of habit, he raised his right hand and rubbed his temples as he muttered to himself, "The awakening of the celestial worthies will is faster and more intense than I expected. If I hadn't devoured Zeradol's Beyonder characteristic and used the remnant mental imprint to balance it and stalled for time, I wouldn't have been able to adjust my state and stop him from awakening." However, this made Klein's mental state rather unstable. And he didn't lose control because his miracle invoker potion had already been completely digested, and the new attendant of mysteries Beyonder characteristic he consumed was mostly digested shortly after consumption. The identity of the world was blessed of the owner of Sapphira Castle, making it directly equivalent to the attendant of mysteries. Therefore, Klein had already acted the role of attendant of mysteries for a very long time, and it had been quite successful. As for the second attendant of mysteries Beyonder characteristic, he still needed some time to digest it.